The air smelled like lilies and rain-soaked grass. The church was too quiet, so quiet that even my breathing felt like a disturbance. My husband Daniel lay in the casket at the front, his face pale and distant, like a man halfway erased from the world. I stood there, clutching the folded flag from his service. My fingers trembled. I had practiced how to stand tall, how to smile for guests who'd come to offer pity. But when the last hymn ended and people started leaving, the mask cracked. That's when Ethan walked towards me. Daniel's son from his first marriage, 24, clean cut, wearing the kind of black suit that still looked expensive even when it was rented. His jaw was tight, but his eyes, those gray, calculating eyes, didn't look sad. They looked satisfied. He wrapped his arms around me, his grip firm. I could smell his cologne, sharp and heavy, the kind Daniel used to hate. He leaned close, his mouth near my ear. "Now," he whispered almost tenderly, "everything is mine." The words burned through me like acid. Before I could respond, he stepped back with a polite smile, nodding to the pastor, to the guests, as if he hadn't just gutted me with a sentence. I stood frozen, staring at him. The guests saw a grieving widow holding herself together. They didn't see the storm brewing behind my eyes. When Ethan turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Daniel's lawyer waiting by the door. The man avoided my gaze. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and as the rain began to fall harder against the stained glass windows, I knew this funeral was not an ending. It was the beginning of a war. The next morning, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. Daniel's presence used to fill every corner, his laugh echoing from the kitchen, his humming while making coffee. Now there was only the tick of the grandfather clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the dining table with a mug of untouched coffee, staring at the lawyer's card lying in front of me. Richard Grant, estate attorney. Daniel had trusted him for years, but yesterday, when I tried to catch his eye, he'd looked uneasy. By noon, Richard called. His voice was stiff, professional. "Mrs. Collins, could you come to the office this afternoon? We'll be reading the will." I felt my heart drop. "Already?" He hesitated. "Ethan requested we move quickly." Of course he did. At the law office, the air smelled of polished wood and old paper. Ethan was already there, sitting in the leather chair that used to be Daniel's favorite whenever he visited me. He looked completely at ease, legs crossed, phone in hand, scrolling like this was a formality he'd already won. Richard cleared his throat. "Daniel's last will and testament was signed 6 months ago. I'll read it now." I listened, barely breathing. The lake house in Vermont. To Ethan, the cabin in Montana. To Ethan, stocks, accounts, real estate, one by one, my husband's legacy transferred to his son. Then came the final line. "To my wife, Grace, I leave our home and the joint account for her comfort and stability." That was it. A house, our house, and some savings. Everything else was gone. Ethan smiled like a cat finally done playing with its prey. "I guess Dad wanted to keep things simple." I forced a smile, my throat burning. "Simple," I said softly, "isn't always fair." He shrugged. "Fair's a matter of perspective." Richard shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. When I stood to leave, Ethan leaned close again, his voice low enough only for me to hear. "You should start packing. I'll be moving in soon." I didn't answer. I just walked out into the gray afternoon, clutching my purse so tightly my fingers hurt. By the time I got home, the anger had settled into something cold and sharp. Ethan thought he'd already won, but Daniel had trusted me, and I knew things about him Ethan never would. Secrets that weren't written in any will. That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm outside rattled the windows, and every flash of lightning painted the empty room in a cold silver light. I kept seeing Daniel's face in the coffin, and hearing Ethan's whisper, "Now everything is mine." He was wrong. Around midnight, I got up and walked into Daniel's study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco, like him. His desk was neat, too neat. Ethan had already been here after the funeral, probably searching for whatever he thought could give him more control. But Daniel had always been one step ahead of everyone, especially his son. I opened the bottom drawer, the one that used to stick. Inside was the old leather journal Daniel carried everywhere. I traced my fingers over the initials burned into the cover. DC. Flipping through, I found pages of notes, lists, scribbles, numbers, property names, account codes. One word kept repeating, Lakeview. Then tucked between two pages, I found a small brass key taped to an envelope. My name was written on the front in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. My throat tightened. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single note. Grace, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to explain in time. Everything I built wasn't just for Ethan. He made choices I couldn't protect him from. The real legacy is where we started. Lakeview. Trust the lockbox. It will tell you what to do next. My pulse quickened. Lakeview. That was our first home together. The tiny lake cabin we'd sold years ago. I looked at the key again. The brass glinted under the desk lamp. He had hidden something from Ethan, something he wanted only me to find. The next morning, I called the realtor who'd helped us sell Lakeview 10 years ago. Hi, this is Grace Collins. I used to own the cabin by the North Dock, number 12. Do you know if the new owners are still there? The woman on the phone paused. That place? Actually, it's been vacant for a while. Foreclosure. The bank still holds it. My heart thudded. Vacant? Yes, ma'am. If you have a key, you could probably take a look. I thanked her, hung up, and grabbed my coat. As I drove north, rain turned to mist over the winding roads. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like Daniel was there, guiding me through every turn. When I reached the cabin, the air smelled of pine and wet earth. Everything looked frozen in time. The porch steps still creaked the same. The lake still mirrored the trees like glass. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. Inside, dust floated in the air, glowing in the faint light that filtered through the blinds. I could hear my own heartbeat. Under the floorboards near the fireplace, where Daniel used to hide his fishing gear, I found a small metal box with the same initials engraved on top, DC. I knelt and opened it. Inside were folders, a flash drive, and one last note. For Grace only. If Ethan ever tries to claim what's not his, show this to Richard, and don't trust appearances. My hands trembled as I held the drive up to the light. Whatever was inside, it was Daniel's final defense, and maybe my way to end this war before it began. By the time I got back home, dawn was breaking. The sky over the lake was painted in shades of bruised pink and gray. I hadn't slept, but the exhaustion was buried under something stronger, purpose. I made coffee and plugged the flash drive into Daniel's old laptop. It whirred almost reluctantly before opening a folder titled simply Ethan. Inside were dozens of files, emails, bank records, contracts, and something that made my stomach twist. Wire transfers from Daniel's company to offshore accounts in Ethan's name. I scrolled faster, my pulse climbing. There were scanned letters, too. One stood out, dated just weeks before Daniel's death. Dad, if you don't sign the papers, I'll tell everyone what you did with the money. You'll lose everything, and so will Grace. I froze. My breath caught. Ethan had blackmailed his father. I leaned back, covering my mouth. Daniel hadn't changed the will because he wanted to. He'd been forced to. But then why leave the flash drive? Why not tell me? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of gravel crunching outside. I glanced out the window. A silver BMW was pulling into the driveway. Ethan. My stomach dropped. I quickly pulled the drive from the laptop and slipped it into my pocket just as he knocked on the door, sharp, impatient. When I opened it, he didn't wait for an invitation. He walked right in, dripping arrogance like cologne. "Morning, Grace," he said, eyes sweeping the room. "Couldn't sleep either." I folded my arms. "What do you want, Ethan?" He smirked. "Just came to see how you're holding up, and to remind you, I'll be moving in soon. Dad's lawyer said I can take possession of the properties within the month." I forced my voice steady. "You seem very eager for someone who just lost his father." "Dad was old," he said flatly. He knew it was time to pass things on. My blood ran cold. There was no sadness in his tone, no grief, just entitlement. I took a slow step toward him. "You know," I said softly, "Daniel left more than just money behind. He left records." His smirk faltered. "Records?" "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "The kind that tell stories. The kind people might want to read." He studied me for a long moment, then laughed. "You're bluffing." I didn't blink. "Try me." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his expression, brief but real. He straightened his tie, muttered something under his breath, and turned to leave. When the door closed, I finally exhaled. My hands were shaking. He was scared, which meant Daniel's files were more powerful than I'd realized. But fear wasn't enough. I needed proof, legal proof, to take him down. That's when I remembered Richard, the lawyer. Daniel had told me once, "He's honest, but careful. If you ever need him, bring facts, not emotions." I glanced at the flash drive, clutched tight in my palm. Tomorrow, I'd bring him both. Richard's office smelled like strong coffee and old carpet glue when I walked in the next morning. He looked up from behind his desk, startled to see me. "Grace," he said, standing quickly. "You look determined." "I found something," I said, setting my purse down. "Something Daniel left behind." His eyes narrowed. "What kind of something?" I took out the flash drive and placed it in his hand. "You'll want to see for yourself." He slid it into his computer and clicked through the files. As the documents opened, emails, transactions, signed contracts, his expression hardened. "My God," he muttered. "These are company records. Ethan was embezzling from his father's accounts for years. Daniel must have discovered it." I nodded. "Ethan blackmailed him to change the will." Richard leaned back, rubbing his chin. "That explains Daniel's behavior the past few months. He seemed burdened. I thought it was his health. He wanted to protect me," I said quietly. "But he knew Ethan wouldn't stop. That's why he left this." He turned to me. "Grace, this evidence could invalidate the entire will. If Daniel was under duress, the court can nullify it. Ethan could lose everything." "Good," I said, my voice low and steady. "He should." Richard looked uncertain. "You'll need to be careful. If Ethan realizes what you have, he already suspects." Richard sighed. "Then we move quickly. I'll contact a judge I trust and file an emergency injunction to freeze the estate transfer. Can you bring the original note Daniel left?" I nodded. "It's safe." As he made a few calls, I stepped toward the window. Outside, the city looked washed clean after the rain. For the first time in days, I could breathe. Then Richard's tone changed. "Ethan's already called this morning," he said, lowering the phone. "He asked about your visit." "Of course he did," I murmured. "He sounded angry. You might want to stay somewhere else tonight." I thought about the house, Daniel's photos, his clothes still hanging in the closet. No, that was my home. I wasn't leaving. "I'll be fine," I said. "Just let me know once the papers are filed." As I walked out of the office, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Ethan, you shouldn't have gone digging, Grace. Some things should stay buried." My hands tightened around the phone. He was watching me, but he didn't know I wasn't scared anymore. I drove home slowly, replaying Daniel's words in my mind. Don't trust appearances. By the time I reached the driveway, my plan was clear. If Ethan wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure the next move was mine. And final. That night I sat by the fireplace, the same one where I'd found Daniel's lockbox. I opened my laptop and sent the files to a backup drive, then drafted a message to Richard, attaching everything. If anything happened to me, he'd know exactly where to look. When I hit send, I whispered to the empty room, "It's almost over, Daniel." Outside, a car engine idled down the street, headlights flickering through the window. Ethan was there, watching, waiting. He thought I was a grieving widow playing defense. But tomorrow, he'd learn what Daniel already knew. I was always the one who finished what others started. The next morning, sunlight cut through the curtains like a blade. I hadn't slept. Every sound, the creak of the house, the hum of the fridge, felt amplified like the world was holding its breath. Richard had called before dawn. The injunction is filed, he said. The judge froze all asset transfers. Ethan can't touch a cent until this is resolved. I almost smiled. Thank you, Richard. Be careful, he warned. If he feels cornered, there's no telling what he'll do. But I already knew what he'd do. Ethan didn't like losing. At 8 a.m. the doorbell rang. I didn't have to look to know who it was. I opened the door to find him standing there. Pressed suit, fake charm, eyes burning. You've been busy, he said. I stepped aside. Come in, Ethan, we should talk. He walked in, scanning the room like a predator. You filed something with the court, didn't you? I folded my arms. Daniel didn't change his will by choice. You forced him. He smirked. Prove it. I reached into my pocket and held up a small flash drive. I already did. For the first time, he froze. His confidence cracked. You don't know what you're doing, Grace. Oh, I do, I said, taking a slow step closer. You stole from your father. You blackmailed him, and when he tried to make it right, you destroyed his peace in the last months of his life, but you didn't destroy me. He took a step toward me, jaw tight. You think the court's going to believe some sentimental widow over me? They'll believe the documents, I said. And Richard. He's seen everything. His nostrils flared. He looked toward the window, then back at me. You had to ruin it for both of us. I almost laughed. Daniel built all this for love, and you turned it into a game of greed. I'm just resetting the board. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, smirking again, weakly this time. You're just like him, always pretending to be better than everyone else. I didn't answer. I just opened the door. Leave, Ethan. For a second, I thought he might say something else, but he didn't. He walked out, shoulders stiff, fury radiating off him like heat. As his car roared away, I felt something inside me unclench. The storm had passed. 3 weeks later, the court confirmed what Daniel had hoped for. The will was invalid. The estate reverted to its previous version. Everything shared equally between us, as it should have been. Ethan didn't even show up at the final hearing. I visited Daniel's grave that afternoon. The sun was warm and the air smelled of cut grass and roses. I placed my hand on the headstone. You were right, I whispered. Appearances can lie, but the truth, it always finds its way out. A soft breeze moved through the trees, brushing my hair back, gentle and familiar. For a moment I could almost hear him humming again, just like he used to on Sunday mornings. I smiled, wiping away a tear. Rest now, love. I've taken care of everything. Then I turned and walked back toward the car, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a widow. I felt like a woman who had finally reclaimed her life.